Season 1 of You follows Joe Goldberg, a bookstore manager in New York City who becomes obsessed with aspiring writer Guinevere Beck and begins stalking her and manipulating her life to court her and develop a relationship. When Joe first meets Beck, it's a creepy love at first sight. He fantasizes about being in a relationship with her and justifies all of the horrific things he'll eventually do for love as necessary. Joe breaks into Beck's apartment to snoop around and learn more about her, and follows her throughout her day to keep tabs on her. When a drunken Beck falls into the subway tracks, it's Joe that is miraculously there to save her. He even steals her phone so he can monitor conversations she has once getting a new one. The first major obstacle in Joe's way of winning Beck's heart is her on-again off-again boyfriend Benji. Benji's a bit of a tool, so Joe feels completely justified in attacking him and locking him up in the book vault of his bookstore's basement. Eventually, Joe realizes there's no good way out of this situation and kills Benji. He covers up this act by burning Benji's body and making it appear that Benji has simply run off. Following Benji's murder, Joe and Beck enter into a relationship, but another obstacle presents itself. Beck's best friend Peach is suspicious of Joe and is similarly obsessed with Beck and manipulating her to bend Beck to her wants. A jealous Joe hits Peach on the head with a rock and leaves her for dead, but unfortunately for Joe, she survives. Not sure that it was Joe that attacked her, but still very much suspicious, Peach invites Beck to her family estate for a getaway, with plans to whisk Beck off to live together in Paris. Beck turns down the offer, realizing that Joe was correct about Peach's manipulative ways, and leaves the estate. Joe then kills Peach and frames it as self-inflicted due to heartbreak. With Peach now out of the picture, Joe and Beck are finally free to be together with no more distractions. And that lasts for a few months. Beck grows secretive and distant, which only further fuels Joe's jealousy and possessiveness. He begins to suspect that Beck is cheating on him with her therapist, Dr. Nikki, and even begins seeing the therapist himself using an alias. Eventually, Joe confronts Beck about her relationship with Dr. Nikki. Hurt that Joe doesn't trust her, she breaks up with him. 3 months pass and Joe is doing his best to move on. Throughout the season, Joe has looked after Paco, the young son of his drug addict neighbor Claudia. Claudia's boyfriend is an abusive parole officer named Ron, who is constantly picking fights with Claudia, Paco, and Joe. Joe enters into a relationship with Karen, Claudia's friend, and the two help Claudia get clean. But try as he might to convince himself that Karen is right for him, Joe can't seem to get over Beck. Similarly, Beck isn't over Joe, and so Joe breaks up with Karen and reunites with Beck, making them seemingly stronger than ever. But when a spiteful Karen tells Beck that Joe will always be pining for his ex, Beck begins looking into Joe's previous relationship with the mysterious Candace. Beck discovers that Candace was an ex-girlfriend of Joe's that seemingly went completely off the grid following their breakup, and hasn't contacted friends or family in years. Beck grows concerned that something sinister is at play with Joe, and she should be concerned, as we learn that Joe had previously killed a man named Elijah after discovering that Candace was having an affair with him. Mr. Mooney, the original owner of the bookstore Joe managed and a father figure that mentally abused him as a child, helped Joe cover up Elijah's death. Although Joe is able to come up with an explanation for Candace's disappearance, all of his dark secrets are revealed when Beck discovers a hidden box in Joe's apartment, filled with mementos of all his previous crimes. Beck's original phone, Peach's phone, Benji's phone, even Benji's teeth. His violent ways exposed, Joe is left with no choice but to lock Beck up in the book vault until he can figure out a way to make their relationship work again. Beck pleads for her life and release, and eventually even suggests that Joe pin all of his crimes on Dr. Nikki. Back at his apartment building, the abusive Ron beats Claudia and puts her in the hospital. Joe is forced to kill Ron to protect Paco and explains to Paco what must be done to cover up this murder. As Joe deals with all of this, Beck uses a typewriter in the book vault to write her story, detailing all of Joe's horrific crimes, but attributing them to Dr. Nikki instead. When Joe finally returns, Beck is able to convince him that she loves him and understands why he did everything he did. She lures Joe into the vault and locks him inside, but her escape plan is thwarted when she discovers the basement door is also locked and a loyal Paco refuses to help her. Joe then escapes the vault and finally kills Beck. 4 months later, the book Beck wrote in the vault is a huge success. It also leads to the arrest of a framed Dr. Nikki, inadvertently exonerating Joe. But just as it looks like Joe will be able to get away with all of his past crimes, his ex-girlfriend Candace shows up, very much alive, to confront Joe over their unfinished business. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN that helps protect and encrypt your private online data, so you won't need to worry about any potential Joe Goldberg snooping around your personal business. Surfshark masks your IP address so your location and download history can't be linked to your identity. And their clean web feature blocks ads, trackers, malware, and phishing attempts, so you can surf the web with a peace of mind. My personal favorite Surfshark feature is the ability to change my internet's virtual location, so I can stream series that aren't available in my country. For example, if I switch my location from the United States to the UK, I can watch shows like The Office and Friends on Netflix. So don't waste money signing up for a dozen different streaming services, sign up for Surfshark instead. And if you sign up using my link in the description, you'll get 83% off your subscription plus 3 months free. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to try it out. So head on over to the link in the description to sign up for Surfshark today. Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the recap. In Season 2 of You, we learn the truth about Joe's past relationship with his ex Candace. After getting into a fight upon discovering that Candace was having an affair, Joe accidentally bludgeoned Candace's head. Thinking he'd killed her, Joe buried Candace's body and fled. It turns out Candace wasn't dead and woke up after having been buried alive. She went to the police to have Joe arrested, but they turned her away. And so now Candace has to get her own justice by making sure Joe's life was miserable and to stop him from ever hurting another woman. With Candace back in the picture, Joe flees New York City to hide out in Los Angeles. He locks up professional identity forger Will Bettelheim in a newly built book vault and assumes his identity, then quickly secures himself a new apartment and a new job working in the book section of a trendy grocery store called a Navarin. Proving to himself that he's a better changed man, Joe eventually releases the real Will Bettelheim from the book vault after he promises to keep quiet. Joe quickly finds a new object of his desire, Love Quinn, a recent widow from the wealthy family that owns a Navarin. Unlike Beck, Love is quickly all in on her relationship with Joe right from the start. And it's Joe who is hesitant to pursue the relationship due to fearing it will lead Love to the same fate as Beck. But Joe eventually succumbs to his desires and engages in a relationship with Love. Complicating his relationship with Love is her own codependent relationship with her twin brother 40. 40 is a recovering addict and trust fund baby who dreams of being a famous writer and director, but lacks the drive and talent necessary to succeed. Soon, Joe has been roped into helping 40 write his next attempted film project, an adaptation of Guinevere Beck's book. And to make things with 40 even more complicated, Love's twin brother also begins dating a woman named Amy, who is actually Joe's ex-girlfriend Candace. Candace gets close to Love and warns her about Joe's violent nature, but unfortunately, Love believes Joe when he claims that Candace is just a crazy, spiteful ex-girlfriend. Meanwhile, Joe also develops a friendship with his new teenage neighbor Ellie. When Ellie lands an internship with famous comedian Henderson, Ellie's older sister Delilah confides in Joe that Henderson has a history of sexually assaulting minors, including Delilah when she was younger. And so, Joe goes into vengeful protector mode, confronting Henderson about his history of abuse. This confrontation ends with Joe accidentally pushing Henderson down a flight of stairs, which kills him, leading to yet another murder for Joe to cover up. Although the police determine that Henderson killed himself, Delilah's cop friend with benefits, Fincher, starts looking more into the case and begins to suspect Joe. This prompts Delilah to search Joe's apartment for evidence, which prompts Joe to lock Delilah up in his book vault. Joe doesn't want to kill Delilah and leave Ellie an orphan, so he plans to release her and flee the country, leaving behind Love. But when Joe goes to the book vault the next morning, he finds that Delilah has been murdered. Candace arrives and locks Joe inside, then calls Love to the scene so she can prove once and for all that Joe is a murderer. But this plan backfires on Candace as Love murders her and confesses to Joe that she had also killed Delilah so that Joe's secret was safe and he wouldn't need to run away without her. And then Love reveals that she had also killed her and 40's au pair when they were children, and that all season long she had been manipulating Joe to make him fall in love with her, the same way he did to Beck in season 1. This shatters Joe's image of Love and he even debates killing her, but Love reveals that she's pregnant. So Joe decides to try loving Love again so he can be with his baby. And although Love can forgive Joe of his past crimes, her twin brother 40 cannot, confronting the two of them and holding Joe at gunpoint. And that's when Officer Fincher arrives, shooting and killing 40. The murders of Henderson and Candace are then pinned on 40, and the Quinn family helps to cover up the crimes. Joe then gives the newly orphaned Ellie a stack of cash and promises to continue sending money as she runs off to start a new life. Now, with all of his roadblocks and issues resolved, Joe is free to be with Love, moving into a nice suburban house together in which they could raise their baby. But finding out Love is a murderer is not something Joe can easily move past, and he's already got his sights set on his next object of desire, his new next-door neighbor. In Season 3 of You, Joe and Love attempt to live in peaceful domestic bliss in the Madre Linda suburbs, but things quickly begin to unravel. Joe becomes obsessed with their new neighbor Natalie Engler and loses interest in both his wife Love and their newborn child Henry. When Love discovers Joe's latest obsession, she murders Natalie. After helping Love dispose of Natalie's body, Joe and his wife attempt to cover up Natalie's death while also ingratiating themselves into their new community. Joe is hired by a local librarian named Marienne to restore rare books, leading to her becoming Joe's newest obsession. When Joe discovers that Marienne's ex-husband Ryan was playing dirty to win custody of the couple's young child, Joe begins stalking him to figure out a way to help his new love. Eventually, Ryan catches Joe stalking him, forcing Joe to murder him. Meanwhile, Love opens her own bakery and builds a new plexiglass vault in its basement. After discovering a local anti-vax man named Gil had inadvertently caused Henry to catch the measles, Love frames him for Natalie's murder. Love also befriends local mom influencer Sherry Conrad, who proposes that she and her husband Carrie enter into a swinging relationship with Love and Joe. Joe, looking for a way to end his marriage, agrees to the proposition. As Joe and Love continue their new sexual exploits with the Conrads, they accidentally expose their involvement in Natalie's murder. Joe and Love are forced to subdue the Conrads and lock them in the plexiglass vault. As Love feels Joe pulling away to focus on his new obsession, she begins a new relationship of her own. Love meets and quickly becomes romantic with a young college student named Theo. Love soon discovers that Theo is in fact the stepson of Matthew Engler, husband of the murdered Natalie. Theo confides in Love that Matthew is skeptical that Gil is the real murderer and begins illegally surveilling the residence of Madre Linda. Although Matthew eventually gives up on his search, Theo does see video footage of Joe driving Natalie's car and races to the bakery to warn Love of her husband's crimes. At the bakery, Theo discovers the imprisoned Conrads, forcing Love to knock him out, although Joe does rescue him and bring him to the hospital. Love finally confronts Joe about his new obsession with Marienne, prompting Joe to ask for a divorce. Devastated by her husband's actions, Love paralyzes him with a drug known as aconite and then calls Marienne to their home, where she reveals to the librarian that Joe was a violent man who had murdered Ryan. After Marienne flees, Love attempts to kill her husband for his betrayal. Instead, Joe reveals that he has taken an antidote and then murders Love. He then frames her for all of the Madre Linda deaths and burns down their home. As the season comes to a close, Sherry and Carrie escape the vault, their marriage stronger than ever, the estranged Matthew and Theo reconcile, and Joe leaves his son Henry in the care of his co-worker Dante, before heading to Paris, France in search of Marienne.